Welcome to the Emerson Group Wealth Call for July 2024. My name is Nick Emerson with the Emerson Group, and I specialize in representing investment property owners with an emphasis in tax-deferred reinvestment strategies, or the 1031 exchange. Today's call, I'm excited to be talking about really estate planning, tax mitigation, and understanding how you own your assets. So on today's call, we're going to talk more about really what's the appropriate way to take title to a property, to be holding your assets, in order for you to be best mitigating risk, exposure, taxes, and making sure you're passing on the most generational wealth possible for your estate. So to make sure we have a very thorough and detailed call on that, I'm joined with Rebecca Van Loon here at Smith & Sullivan in downtown, where she is a certified estate planning specialist with an emphasis in taxes, and also a recipient of 3 cum laudes from 3 different colleges, correct?
Correct.
And 1 magna cum laude. So I figured she might be the best person to help you cross your T's and dot your I's, considering she excels in this space and has also represented my family at one time. So Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on the call today and really helping us get more educated and wealthy in the real estate space and in tax planning and all things above.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to our fun discussion.
Yeah, let's do it. All right, so tell us a little bit about what you'd say are the most common mistakes that typically show up at your office, right? When you have either new clients coming in or clients that come from someone else, what do you see are typically the most common pitfalls or mistakes that people make within their estate?
Sure, yeah, and really kind of thinking from a real estate perspective on this question is a lot of times I see that people just really don't know what they own, how they own it, what everything is worth in their portfolio. So I'd say number one is just a clear picture or a balance sheet of what they know, of what they have. And then the second is knowing how they own it. Is, many people will come and say, oh yeah, I think this is in my trust. And then when we actually pull title, it's not in their trust, or they own it with someone else and they never cleaned up title. So those are the 2 biggest that I see just in terms of real estate. And then on top of that is they either just don't have an estate plan, or their estate plan doesn't say what they think it says.
So first of all, it's take stock of what you have, right? What's on paper exactly? What do you own? How do you own it? And are you clear on how do those, I guess, work with each other, right? How is this property and this property tied together? Are they held in the right place? Or do you think they are, right? These aren't the conversations you want to be thinking, you want to know for sure.
Right, and that's a lot of times, first meeting is, hey, let's go over your assets, and we list all the properties and say, yes, I own this, and then we go and we verify and we pull title and we check and say, well, you do own this, but did you know that you actually own this through an LLC? Or you thought it was in your trust, right, but you did a refinance 3 years ago and it went out of your trust and it's not in your trust anymore, so let's do that.
And that's something very common we hear a lot of, is that, hey, we have a trust and we find sometimes the property's not actually in the trust.
Correct.
Well, I didn't know that I had to actually put the property in the trust. Well, that's right. These are things you want to know for certain, and you don't want to find out because a life event happens.
Correct. And a lot of times, hopefully we find out at the meeting and we're able to put it into the trust. But unfortunately, sometimes we find out after someone's passed away. And the downside that is now you're going to court. You're either going to court through a full probate proceeding, which is you're trying to avoid. That's why you put together the trust in the first place. Or you're going through some other mechanism to try to get the court to order we meant to have it in the trust, so please find an order and don't make us go through probate. But either way, you're in court, and we're trying to avoid that.
Right. And look, these are the conversations that, quite frankly, we try to avoid, right? Or we don't want to touch because it's more work on top of our daily responsibilities, and yet these are some of the most important things for us to make sure are lined up the right way, so that all of our hard work, right, everything we've done to earn these assets and this wealth is passed on to our family. All that hard work is conveyed, right, and not for nothing, not for the state of California or Uncle Sam.
Right, yeah, and this is where title and ownership is really important too, is imagine that you went into a co-ownership structure with a family member or a friend, and you closed really, really quickly, and title just says, A and B is joint tenants. Well, you may think you own 50%, but really joint tenancy means if A passes first, B now owns 100% of the property just by operation of law. That may not be what you want. You may say, A, no, I want my 50% to go to my family, right?
Correct.
And so that's a great example of what you think you own and what you think how you own it and what's going to happen is not always the reality. So double checking that.
So thinking that knowing could be a couple $100,000 mistake or more.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay, so now we talked a little about making sure that your properties are within your trust, or that you really inspected what you expect from your estate. We want to talk more about some of the just structures of owning real estate, right? What are the basic structures available to you, and kind of what are the advantages or disadvantages, or why you might want to own right in one manner versus the other?
Sure, yeah. So kind of looking at how you own the real property, that's going to tell us all sorts, like is there creditor protection? How is this asset going to be transferred upon my passing? How is this managed? So kind of the basics of direct ownership, individual, right. That could be in your individual name. That could be as a joint tenant. That could be as a tenant in common. And then if you're married, that could be community property with right of survivorship. And all of those have different aspects and consequences, but that's really direct ownership.
Right.
Then the next step is, well, I don't want an asset in my individual name because I want to avoid probate. And so in California, we create a real revocable trust, and right. Then you move the title out of your name and you now move it into the trust, and now your trust owns it, or your trustee.
So I want to stop there and say, when would you recommend, right? We go from this first stepping stone of having direct ownership as an individual to, okay, I want to put this into, right, a trust or a revocable trust. Like, when does that happen in your opinion, or should happen?
If you own any assets in California, you should have a trust.
Okay.
And the trust is twofold. One, it's planning and making sure things are set up for your family, and then especially for real property, you're avoiding a probate proceeding. And the probate proceeding in California now, even in the most basic, it's going to take a year to a year and a half just to get through that process. You're going to have court fees. It's public. It's going to minimize and limit the management of the asset. So anyone should have a revocable trust. Timing, probably yesterday, but as soon as possible, get it in place. And then once it's in place, it's super simple when, working with someone like you, right. When you go to purchase property. Well, then you're just going to purchase it right in the name of the trust from the beginning. You don't have to come back to your estate planning attorney to do it. It's there. You can move assets in and out. So answer is right now.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Right now. Okay, so if you're listening or watching this right now and you do not have a trust set up, the first step in this call would be to take action and get a trust set up for your estate, or for your properties and for your family, really. And then the next thing would be, as far as going in from a revocable to an irrevocable, what's the difference between the two of them?
So your revocable trust is your basic estate planning vehicle. That's what you right. and I would set up to own our assets. An irrevocable trust is one that you can't change, hence irrevocable, and that's usually set up by someone else for your benefit. So an asset, and that could be because you inherited property, right. That could be receiving a gift.
Okay. Right. So why would someone want to make it irrevocable?
There's a number of reasons that you'd have an irrevocable trust. Some of them are tax planning vehicles, and then some of them are just management vehicles saying, I want this property to, now I'm speaking as if I'm gifting it to my child.
Okay.
I want this property to stay in the family. I want my child to benefit from the asset, but I don't want it to go outright to them. So that would be an example. I would leave this property to an irrevocable trust.
Okay.
It's there, they have access to it, but they can't divert the asset to a spouse.
It defines how they inherit it and what they do next with it.
Exactly. And then the other kind of pro of an irrevocable trust from the recipient standpoint is it also creates some level of creditor protection, in that now this real property is insulated in an irrevocable trust, and now my child's creditors typically can't get to the irrevocable trust assets. Exceptions, of course, this is general, but it does provide some creditor protection for the beneficiary of that trust.
So if you're in a revocable trust, right, then how does that differ as far as your exposure to, right, people that might be coming after you for creditors or what have you?
Yeah, so in whether you own real property directly in your individual name or you hold it in your revocable trust, that doesn't provide you with any creditor protection.
Okay.
So your revocable trust really is an estate planning vehicle to say who gets this property and how is it going to be managed after I pass away.
So if one of the kids had a situation where there was creditors going after them, a parent passed away, they had irrevocable trust, then essentially they couldn't come after that trust, right, to get their fair share.
Correct.
So you're protecting it from two sides, the parent side and the child side in a sense, as far as the creditors go?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So there's definitely some major benefits of an irrevocable trust. Downside, which is something that you're always looking at, pros and cons. It's irrevocable, right? So it's definite. It's more definite. There's ways that you can modify irrevocable trust, but look for this purposes.
That would kind of be my question, is right? Like we put this together 10 years ago. Life's different now. What do I have to do to change it? Is it a big process, or is it filling out a couple forms and coming in to see you?
It really depends, and that really comes down to thinking about those things when you draft the trust and anticipating changes of circumstances that could happen 10 years, 20, 50 years. Sometimes these trusts can last for a long time.
Right.
Building in mechanisms within the trust instrument, like trust protectors that can modify the trust. There's some mechanisms that you don't have to go to court if everyone consents. And then if the next step is you can go to court and seek a court modification of an irrevocable trust, but takes steps.
Right.
So there's ways, but think of your irrevocable trust as set in stone.
All right, so I want to get into a very common conversation or topic that I get calls on, which is the LLC or entity ownership structure, right? I oftentimes get a call from clients asking whether they should put their property in an LLC, why they should put, I don't think they're really clear on why they should put it in, but a lot of people feel compelled that if they put it in an LLC, that makes sure that, right, there's no exposure to themselves, which is true in some instances, but I also want to make sure people understand that there's a lot of other considerations to that. So really wanted to harp on that. Rebecca, tell us more about kind of the LLC structure, why people should use it or when, right? Because I think some people maybe not be at a point or ever really need LLC protection, right? If you don't have a lot of assets or wealth in some sense to try to make sure is not coming after, then why would you want to pay $800 a year to the California to have an LLC?
Right. Yeah, great question. So, the main reason or reasons that you're seeing entities as owners of assets, number one is the creditor protection.
Right.
And then number two is the kind of ongoing management of the asset. So in terms of the types of entities that you likely come across, LLC probably being the most common. You might also see a limited partnership. Yep. And then rarely, but sometimes you'll see corporate ownership.
Right.
And all three of those, limited partnership, LLC, corporation, provided that they're set up properly and provided that the owner of the property maintains them and isn't, they're following all of the corporate formalities, that's going to provide the creditor protection. So most common, slip and fall on the property. Well, that creditor could maybe look to the assets of the entity, but they can't look to your house. They can't look to your private investments. Right. And that's really where you're seeing the creditor protection.
You're keeping it isolated to within that asset.
Within that asset. And so too, like I see people that have multiple properties, they say, well, can I have one LLC and have the LLC own all three? Yeah, that's providing you the protection of those three properties from your personal assets, but the next step above that would be each property having their own, being held in their own individual LLC. So that way, if something happens on property A, you're not exposing all of your properties.
Well, I was just saying, putting in all your properties in one LLC kind of defeats the purpose of the first place, right? You're bundling all these together. So instead of being confined to one asset risk, can't you essentially, they can go after you within any of those properties in the LLC?
Within any of those properties, but they would still be limited to not look to your personal assets, like your house and your investment portfolio. And that kind of goes to your point of managing the risk is and this is where, working with you and working with your financial advisors and your legal counsel is, what really is your risk? Because you're right, there's costs associated with all of this. The $800 minimum tax to the franchise tax board. Do you need to file extra income tax returns? So that's really the creditor protection piece of that. And then I'm also seeing entities, if you're going to be co-owning property with anybody, whether that's a family member or a business partner, because your entity, that's going to be where you define what everyone's rights and obligations are with respect to the property. And that's really important.
So one of my first questions I always have for people is, well, what if we just beefed up the insurance on the property? Why wouldn't that cover the majority of these instances, right? As far as making sure that if there was an incident or an accident, that there was just ample coverage for the property. Wouldn't that be the most simplest form of way to protect yourself to start?
Sure, yeah, and you're always going to have your premise liability property insurance, and then double checking and looking at your umbrella policy, and deciding between an umbrella and your property insurance versus an entity. That's going to also be you assessing and mitigating your own risk. If I own a 100-unit apartment, I'm going to be much more incentivized to hold this through an LLC. If I'm owning a single family home and that's really my only investment and the value is fairly, low compared to my other assets, and I mitigate that with umbrella and policy, that is definitely a way to go. It's not giving you the maximum, but it's giving you something.
But I think one thing I'm hearing that's important is just people need to sit down and really define what is their biggest concern or perceived risk. Really spell it out so that we can understand what do we actually need to make sure that this instance is protected, right? Not just assume that, well, let's do this because that'll protect it. Well, that's true, but there might be other avenues instead of having 10 LLCs, right? Where you got to file 10 different tax returns and $800 every, it starts to get confusing, and some people don't even know why they're doing it. So just getting back to the basics of what is your most, your biggest risks or your concerns or your liabilities, and having the appropriate mechanism to protect you for that, right? Within whatever level you might be within, of course. Right?
Yep. Correct.
Perfect. Okay, so we've talked about making certain that we're mitigating or protecting ourselves from creditor risk. And I wanted to talk about the tax implications, right? What are the other aspect of making certain that you're thinking ahead and understanding how to mitigate or defer all taxes associated with estates and with just general transfership of ownership and sales?
Great question, Nick. So when we say taxes, it's such a broad category. So I when I look at the taxes, and when you're looking at a real estate portfolio and helping clients and navigate through this the tax world, we're looking at income tax, right? What are the taxes that I'm paying as I'm collecting rents and depreciation and that? What's the income tax ramification if I were to sell the property? And then you also have property tax. That's really huge in California. And then you also have kind of the other added layer of transfer tax, and that's the federal estate and gift taxes. Are there going to be additional taxes when I transfer this real property to my kids or grandkids, either as lifetime gifts or at my death? So really big area there in taxes. Starting with the first one on the income tax side, circling way back to our very first point in our conversation is knowing what you own and how you own it. And
what is your position in it from a tax standpoint too?
Exactly. And I know that's something that you help your clients out with that have large real estate portfolios, is really putting down on paper in a format that makes sense, that says, here's what I own, here's what it's worth, here's my income tax basis, this is how many years left of depreciation I have.
Yes.
It's
very rare we have that clarity with clients, right? And if we did, right, it would allow them to understand and maybe recognize when changes need to be made, right? Because you're more in tune to what's going on and how things are flowing in a sense. So just really important to understand, what do you have? Where is that position held, right? So that you can make the appropriate plan, because if you don't recognize what your basis is, or that there is this large tax implication, or maybe you don't know how you might be able to avoid it or defer it. I have a lot of people that maybe have felt stuck for years, and they had the right to make a change. They just didn't know they did. So it's important to understand what you can do, how you can do it, and ultimately what is your position from a tax standpoint, right? So entity, vesting, ownership structure, valuation, debt, equity, taxes, right? They have all these layers to understand about our properties. And my question is, do you know what each layer looks like for your properties right now? Can you say and answer these questions? And if you can't, that's why a conversation with us to help understand that and put together kind of your portfolio on one page, right? As we've help clients out to understand, some people have never even seen it before, right? So this is what I own and what my position is, and what's my return? How much money is my money making for me? What's my equity? What's my debt? Understanding all these things from a bigger picture so that you can put together the appropriate plan for yourself, for your family, or for whatever it is your big why is, that why you're doing this in the first place.
Right, exactly. And on the income tax side, you're looking at it from a cash flow perspective, but from an income tax standpoint, well, maybe if we did put this in an entity and now we're structured as a partnership or something, what impact does that have on our income tax?
Right.
And also designing, and this goes back into your estate plan, there's different tax attributes of, if I own a property at the time that I pass away, there's an income tax readjustment or to your basis. So let's say I depreciated a property down to $100,000 and it's worth $1 million. Well, there's $900,000 of capital gain that's just stuck in this property. If I own this and I pass away, my heirs, so this my $100,000 income tax basis, gets adjusted to the $1 million fair market value and wipes out all of that gain on your passing. And so that goes into your estate planning of, what do you own, how do you own it, and is this an asset I should give away or keep? Right. So that's the aspect that's not necessarily an income tax that's right now, it's a future income tax implication.
Well, another thing I want to point out too is that I look at tax planning also like investing. And what I mean by that is, if you have effective tax planning strategies, it essentially is cash flow in essence, right? Meaning a cost segregation, right? Writing down your property in a different depreciation format to accelerate it in order for you to write off, other income. Other ways like that where, I realize that there's actually ways where you could lose on paper with income, but win in taxes, and that ultimately helps you win as a whole. Mm-hmm. And I think that's layers that people may not have even recognized, that you can use taxes to your benefit to continue creating wealth and passing on wealth, for your family.
Yep.
So it's huge.
And kind of the next layer of tax on top of that is the income tax, but the property tax here in California, and structuring transactions appropriately, especially on the front end, can save hundreds of thousands on an annual basis that really impact the cash flow and the rate of return that you get on a property. And and I think especially now in light of Proposition 19 that was passed back in I think November of 2020 and became effective February of 2021, there's still ways to structure and plan for property tax so that your kids can take take over the assessed value. And you can do that through entities, but you really have to set it up correctly on the front end.
Yeah, and there's been, to your point, changes. So knowing that and how you inherit it and whether you're going to be stepping up your tax basis or not, oftentimes that's the reason why clients of ours have to sell, because they want the property and they have a great position in it, yet they have a huge tax bill every year. And if they're not owning it or living in it directly, it's usually not a kind of bill or check you want to write, every 6 months if you're not benefiting from it in a direct manner.
Exactly.
All right, let's talk about the planning part, the part that we all cringe sometimes because we don't like to plan or think that far ahead. But we know that it's really important to understand what you have and what you're going to do next, and making sure the structures you have and everything you have in place supports that. So with that in mind, kind of what do you want your retirement to look like, or do you even want to own real estate in retirement? And making sure you're kind of working backwards to put that plan together if you're thinking ahead, right? So what does that look like with the conversations you have typically with kind of cultivating that plan and executing the plan, I suppose?
Right, yeah, and I'd say this, and this is a really personal question for every single client.
Yep.
And the clients driving this conversation, their advisors, like you, their CPA, their financial advisor, their estate planning attorney, we're all working together to accomplish the client's goal. And from like a retirement standpoint, how active do you want to be in the management of the property? Do you want to continue to own it? Does that look like, hey, in 5 years, a family member is going to step in as the manager, but I'm still going to be getting the passive income? Or does it look like, no, I really want a third-party property manager to manage this property and create passive income for myself and future generations? Or is this, no, I'm really ready to get out of real estate, and how do I do that efficiently with some intention around it?
Yeah, how do I make sure that when I leave, the state of California and the IRS don't take too much of it so that I can enjoy some of it when we're all said and done?
Right, yeah. And so a lot of that looks like, and on the retirement standpoint, if you're going to keep the property, that really the succession plan is, who's in place to continue operating and managing everything, so you can just be getting your check every month. And then on the kind of the exit side of the real estate market, that's looking at what would a sale look like, and what would my capital gain and my taxes look like. Do I want to do an installment sale? What is that could defer some recognition of the gain, just stretches the recognition out over time. Do I want to do a 1031? Maybe I want to get out of apartments and I'm going to get into a different type of real estate, and I know that's something you counsel your clients with. Another one is 1031 Delaware statutory trust. That's, you get the benefits of a 1031, but you're pooling everything in and you're no longer managing it. That's another special investment vehicle. And then a really cool tool and opportunity that a lot of people don't understand is available to them, and especially if you have some charitable intent, is have you heard about the charitable remainder trust? Right.
And then we want to make sure we really unpack that and expand what that is and what the opportunity is to use that or benefit from that, if that's part of kind of what your plans or retirement goals might be.
Yeah.
For giving back in some sense. But really, to speak to what Rebecca's saying in our space, is really just understanding, are you going to be an active investor, a passive investor, and how do you want your money to work for you when you're retired, right? Or how your kids or family will inherit that income stream. So just really getting clear on what that looks like and having these conversations now, right? A lot of people say, hey, we have a plan, we have a trust in place, everything's taken care of. And yet, have you actually talked to your kids about how they will take ownership of your property as far as they're actually going to manage it for you? Are they going to sell it for you? So making sure you're having these conversations now, because I think one thing for me that's really interesting is we don't have the conversation until someone passes away, and then we look at a piece of paper and find out what actually is supposed to happen, right? I don't think that, we set out to say, hey, I want to keep it a secret until everyone leaves, but that's kind of what we're doing. We got to be making sure we're clear on what conversations we're having about what we have and what we want to do, and make sure that we have the people in our family that will actually do it, not that we assume is going to love to take over all these properties, right? So just understand what you have, who's involved, and what this will look like, and be real with what that is, the reality of who will do what and why. and make sure that you have the right professionals to give you a position to be accountable to those answers and to that action, right? Because this stuff is very easy to, I'll deal with it next week or next month or next year or next tax season, and then you don't. And that's what we want to avoid here. So.
Yep, and you said it perfectly, Nick, of having these conversations now and thinking about these things now. I mean, that's the biggest gift that you can give to your kids and your family, especially on the succession inheritance side, but then also having these conversations now for yourself and what you see and what you want your life to look like as you enter the retirement years.
And one thing I want to say in this that's important is that people need to know that you can bless your kids while you're still alive, right? There is strategies and opportunities for you to use vehicles like the 1031 exchange to help your kids, right? We're in an environment right now where real estate is the most expensive it's ever been. So if there was a way you could take your dilapidated rental and turn it into a property that one of your son or daughter might be able to reside in and enjoy, like, why wouldn't you want to do that, right? And see the benefit of that rather than not doing it. So know that there's a lot of things you can do now too to bless your family or bless, who's important to you within your real estate holdings, if that's a goal for you, as opposed to just having a rental property that you don't want, which I have a lot of friends and family and clients that do. I hate this rental property, yet they keep owning it year in year after, but they don't need to. So know what your options are, because there's a lot of options that people don't recognize will serve them, their kids, and their family. And that's huge. I just want to make sure everyone really understands that. And if you don't, make sure you call me so I can help you.
Exactly.
All right, so let's talk about charitable remainder trusts, right? What is that, and who's typically a good candidate for this vehicle or strategy?
Sure. So, a charitable remainder trust can be used for all sorts of different assets, but really looking here in the real estate area is, and kind of going back to our retirement and exit strategy, is this is for somebody that they've owned a real property for a really long time. They've depreciated the income tax basis basically down to zero. Yeah. They want to get out of real estate, so a 1031 exchange isn't attractive anymore, but they want to have a steady cash flow. And so they say, look, maybe we should just sell this property and invest traditionally. And they run through all the numbers with you, and they look at it and they go, man, that's going to be
that still hurts.
That's going to be a lot of capital gain tax. We just can't afford to do that. And then here's an option to avoid that really big check, and that's the charitable remainder trust. Okay. And how that works with real property is you set up the charitable remainder trust, which I'm going to say the CRT, just to save on words here. You set up the CRT, you contribute your real estate to the CRT. That contribution to the CRT, because it's charitable, triggers an immediate income tax deduction for you. So you can use that on your income tax return. And then the property stays in the trust. And then when you sell the property through the CRT itself is a tax exempt vehicle. So that means that when you sell it, the capital gain that you would realize on the sale, it's tax exempt inside the CRT. No one's paying a single penny to the FTB or the IRS when you sell that property through the CRT. So that's where you get this immediate, hey, I can liquidate this real property. It's going to be now invested traditionally inside the CRT, and I didn't have to write that big, huge check to Uncle Sam. Okay. So that's the big, the tax planning benefit there. And then in the meantime, because it's the charitable remainder trust, charity getting the remainder of it, is while you're living, you continue to pull an income stream or annual distributions out of the trust. So you're able to benefit from the cash flow of this. And then at the time that you pass away, that's the remainder point, whatever's left in that CRT now goes down to charity. And that could be your donor advised fund, that could be a foundation, you can split it among lots of charities. So this really kind of can accomplish two goals. One, you're really planning for taxes, you're also providing your charitable planning through this vehicle, and I guess your third for real estate is you're out of the real estate ownership that either you didn't want anymore, it was just too much of a headache, or it just didn't make sense. So I think kind of to help really drive this home, I think is an example. And so, let's take husband and wife.
Yeah, we're definitely going to need an example to drive this one home, Rebecca.
Yeah. I
got the CRT acronym part. I got that part down.
Yeah. So let's just take husband and wife.
Yeah.
They own a rental property that's worth $10 million. And let's say they at least have some basis. They have a basis of $1 million. And they say, well, if we sold this, we'd have $9 million of capital gain. Well, that sounds horrible. So instead, they take their $10 million investment property, they move it into the CRT, and let's say inside the CRT, they're going to get a 7% payout of the value of the CRT.
When you say they move it into a CRT, what's actually happening?
What's the mechanism? Sure. So the mechanism is you draft, or attorney drafts the charitable remainder trust. That's the trust instrument. Everyone signs it, and then you execute a deed. So now you no longer own it, the trust owns it, and that's the transfer or the contribution to the trust. So now it's moved in there, and then the trust says, while the property is still owned by the trust, you get the net income off of it. If you continue to own it for 3 more years, you continue to get the income off the property. And then when the trust sells the property, the trust then converts to now pay you 7% every year. So with that example, let's assume the $10 million property goes into the CRT. They hold the property for a year. And we'll kind of assume some conservative numbers here, but let's assume that the property would be growing at 3%, and you're getting 2.4% income on it.
That sounds about right.
In year 1, after you've moved it into the CRT, you'd be getting about $240,000 a year distribution. And then let's say in year 2, you sell the property for the full $10 million. Nobody pays a single dime in income tax on the sale. And now the trust converts to now paying you the 7%. So now you're getting $700,000, every year out of this trust. And you're slowly recognizing income and capital gain just on these distributions that you're getting annually. And now the full $10 million net sale proceeds, you now have been able to invest. Let's say you traditionally invested it in a brokerage account. Well, all of those earnings within that brokerage account are also growing income tax free. So think kind of like IRA, 401k. It's all deferred income. Yeah, when you're pulling it out, there's calculations of some portion of your distribution will be taxable, but you're really benefiting from this tax-free growth. So that's kind of how it works cash flow wise. But then the other kicker that you get is, because this is a charitable remainder trust, when you moved that $10 million property into the trust, you also got an immediate income tax deduction. And based on kind of the numbers that we were talking about, and you run through, calculations, it's all based on IRS numbers and actuarial tables and all those things. But based on this example, our husband and wife would get about a $1.6 million income tax deduction that they could then use to offset against other income. So it's a really powerful vehicle. The issues you got to worry about, though, is you've got to do some pre-planning. You can't decide to do this the day before you close on a sale. You have to do it ahead of time. If you have debt on property, that can sometimes create some issues, but you work through it. And then if you own property through an S corporation, you can't use a CRT to own S corp shares. But great vehicle if you've got low income tax basis assets, and you're looking to kind of liquidate that.
Liquidate it without a large point of sale event, so to speak, other than the fact that you get to save a lot of money in taxes up front from that transition, and then get basically chunk down any taxes through your distributions instead of one big tax bill.
Yep, and there's a lot of flexibility in the way that you can design these, and that's the benefit of working with people like you, working with your CPA, your estate planning attorney, to really make this vehicle work for you, and really, any of these structures work for you.
Yeah, planning equals more profit and more time to have leisure, right, and pleasure in retirement.
Right.
So,
right, yeah.
Why don't we want to do it? I don't get it. It seems like it's a really good return. Beautiful. All right, we're gonna conclude this educational conversation with really your succession plan for either a planned succession or an unplanned, right? And ultimately, what does that look like for you if you're incapacitated, and how does your estate function, or what happens next? Mm-hmm. Which is a scary thought, that you want to make sure that you have something in place for that, right? Don't want to be a place where you can't have what you want, accomplished through your wishes and through your plan.
Right. And this is where we see a lot of the pitfalls that we talked about at the very beginning of our conversation.
I'm glad we're concluding it with this, because if you don't do all these other, or if you did all these other things, but you did this wrong, potentially, right, it could not have been for all the effort you put into it.
Yep. So this is really, really important, and really on like the incapacity planning. It's usually an unplanned and potentially unexpected event, and you've worked really, really hard to build your portfolio. You've put a lot of sweat and tears and money into the continued management and profitability of this asset, and something now happens to you, and you want to make sure that asset's protected, and you want to make sure that you're protected. And if you don't have the proper planning in place, you're going to find yourself in court, potentially a conservatorship, and then ultimately kind of chaos for the loved ones around you.
Yeah, you're not in control of what's going to happen, essentially, in some regard.
Right. And so some of the steps that immediate steps you take right now is making sure that you have a financial durable power of attorney in place. Somebody that can step in and make sure that financial decisions are being made if you're not able to do so.
Right.
And if you own the property directly, that's going to be the person that you look to. Make sure your trustee in your trust, that's the person, if the property is held in the trust, that's the person that's going to step in and make sure to be managing the assets. If the property is held through an entity like an LLC, partnership, corporation, look at those documents and make sure that there's a successor manager or a successor who's the successors in the corporation.
I was just saying, is there sometimes you don't see a succession plan?
Yeah. I mean, I think that was number one of our pitfalls, is no one's thinking about this, and this is really important for the owner of the property to make sure that what you've worked for so long is being properly managed, and it's being managed by the people that you want it managed. So the incapacity is kind of the unexpected, but you need to have the documents in place. Otherwise, you're potentially in court, and that's where you don't want to be. And then also, something we talked about is, all right, death is not unexpected, but it's not the most exciting to plan for, but definitely causes issues if not done properly and not thought through well. And that again is court, probate, litigation, uncertainty for your family. And what can you do right now? Make sure you have your estate plan in place. That's your will, that's your trust. If you're owning your assets through an entity, make sure your LLC operating documents and your partnership agreements and shareholder agreements, all of those are up to date, and you've put some thought into it. And that's really that's protecting you, and that's protecting your family.
Right.
And that's the gift that you're giving to everybody.
It is the gift you're giving, or the ungift you're giving, depending on what you have set up, right?
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you brought that up, though, because it really isn't something we think about or even know. Financial durable power of attorney. I've never heard that before. So thank you, right? Thank you for letting us know what we don't know, and that it's pretty clear, right? There's a lot of space and layers in this that we need to make sure we know what they are and what we have. If we don't have them, this should be the call that prompts you to call your estate person and make sure that you know what it is, or if it's not set up properly, make the appropriate corrections. Or call Rebecca, right? She can help go over through your plan and see what you have or don't have, and what your opportunity is to, right, improve or protect your family from where your current framework is.
And two, once you have your documents in place, share them with your professionals. Like,
yes.
if you are moving it into a trust and you're working with Nick, make sure he knows that those documents exist or where to find them. If something were to happen to me, I have documents in place and this is who would be the contact.
And also at the ground level, make sure your own family knows where this stuff is, right?
Yeah.
And hey, it might even be even more cool if you actually talk to maybe the trustee about what's in the trust. And so then they know what to expect, right? And that you can actually have this dialogue and be a good thing, right? I mean, people put trusts together for the purpose of protecting the people, so why wouldn't they want to show them what they've done, right? To give to them and inherit money to better their future. So this is all really important and information that we, right, oftentimes maybe avoid because it's stuff we don't know, it's uncomfortable. Yet it's really critical to, if you're in real estate, if you're building wealth, if you're doing any of these things, this is in direct alignment with what you need to do to make sure that's protected and that your hard work, right, is passed through to your kin. And thank you for really providing this time and education. This is invaluable. This is information that anyone can benefit from. I'm sure everyone took away some kind of aha or nugget. And my advice to you is just take an action. Take one piece of action from this call that we've talked about that will propel you to do that one thing you haven't wanted to do, right? To make that phone call to the trust attorney, or to make the first meeting. But all these things, right? It's really just about creating a plan, thinking big picture, and coming from a place of education so that you can make informed and smart decisions. So thank you, Rebecca, and we'll have our information available to you. If you have questions about, really there's a lot of things within the estate space, within tax strategies, tax planning, right? What would be maybe other reasons why someone would benefit from reaching out to you?
Yeah, I mean, and first of all, thanks again for having me here. It's always fun for me to kind of talk about all of these different areas of my practice. But yeah, I mean, we really just scratched the surface of what goes into estate planning. We didn't talk anything about transfer tax.
That's what's amazing is we just scratched the surface, right? And some of you might feel like you just took a midterm.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say estate and gift tax, the federal tax laws are rapidly changing, and we've got some changes on the horizon here. If you own closely held businesses, you really want to talk about structures of setting things up for family that aren't real estate assets but other assets. Those are all conversations that go into your estate plan. So I could be here for hours. But
Absolutely. Well,
I won't do that to you.
I mean, if you want to say, you can say, but thank you very much for joining our call today, and we trust that you got some wealth out of it. Stay tuned for our next call in August. We'll be talking about more about the 1031 exchange basics and how to accomplish tax-deferred reinvestment strategies. See you next time.